Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Kanika Chopra. I am Assistant Professor, Department of Obs and Gynae, Lady Harding Medical College. And in this evening, I would like to welcome you all. And in a webinar, which will be discussing a very important topic, that is adolescent endometriosis, an incessant problem. And thus, we are searching for solution. So I would like to invite Dr. Angela Aneja ma'am. She is the director and head of the Minimal Access Surgery, Fortis Memorial Institute, Gurgaon. And she is the chairperson of the AOGD Endometriosis Subcommittee 2021 to 23 and president of the Delhi Gynae Forum South 2022. And I would like to welcome her and over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Kanika, and namaskar, everyone. On behalf of AOGT Subcommittee of Endometriosis and Delhi Gynae Forum South, I welcome you all for our quarterly meet on endometriosis. Thank you, AOGT, for giving me this honor. And so today's meeting is on in the adolescents endometriosis. Our AOGT subcommittee of endometriosis has 13 very senior members, which are Dr. Indu Chawla, Dr. Malvika Sabharwal, Dr. Kiran Guleria, Dr. Jyoti Agarwal, Dr. Mamta Mishra, Dr. Dash, Dr. Rita Mahi, Dr. Sonia Nayak, Dr. Mamta Mishra, Dr. Neena, Dr. Rekha, and Dr. Kamna. So I welcome you all, and we all have decided that we are going to have under endometriosis subcommittee of AOGT, we will have theme-based topics, and and we will do case-based discussion. So today is on adolescence endometriosis, and we all know that adolescence endometriosis is a chronic condition and needs a lifelong care plan. Let's see what is in store today with us and how we are moderators and panelists are going to discuss the case and give us a very crisp take home messages. With this, we open this meeting, and it's my honor and privilege to welcome our Dr. Sharda Jain ma'am, who is our chief guest. I know ma'am doesn't need any introduction, but she is a mentor for all of us. She's a great teacher, and she has taught over 2 decades in medical college, which are the topmost in our country, the PGI and Lady Harding. She is a Secretary General of Delhi Gynae Forum, and she has been awarded Lifetime Achievement Awards of Foxy, IMA, Lady Harding, Delhi Gynecologist Forum, and ISSA. Madam also got a Corona Warrior Award, and she is advisor Health National Committee for Women. She is a chairman of Women Wing IMA
Dr.
204.
Angela, enough.
Okay,
Enough.
ma'am. So, ma'am, I welcome you and I request you to say a few words, please, ma'am.
I think, why this particular meeting you have already said. I can only say that, endometriosis is dear to me and so are other adolescents. And 2018 guidelines had probably crystallized the principles of management. And what we feel that as a teacher, what I can say about this particular disease. It's a diagnostic dilemma. Leave aside us, in England, there is a delay in diagnosis of 5 years. So you can imagine how much time it will probably take with us also. It is a debilitating disease, especially for adolescents. The parents will only come to know about endometriosis is that when we know that, not only she's having a period, the family knows it, but I think the whole road knows, this lady is having a period because of dysmenorrhea. Or she will have a constant pain because of the ovarian mass. One thing is, as far this particular problem is concerned, I don't want to discuss the pathogenesis about it, but I know that, the estrogen and the inflammation make a major play. For a diagnosis, I think, for when an adolescent comes to you, she's not asymptomatic invariably. And the diagnostic laparoscopy is gone now. Now we gynecologists have to decide the surgery is once in lifetime. to decide about it right in the beginning itself. What is going to be her roadmap as far the medical treatment is concerned and the surgical treatment is concerned? So we should not take up things very lightly, but at the same time, whatever the current things are there, the medical and both surgicals can definitely bring down the symptoms, but we know it for sure that it is going to recur again. And so I think, it becomes a duty of all gynecologists to sit down with the parents, plan it out, how things have to be done, and not operate left and right as far as when they see an endometrioma that you operate on them. So this is with this particular thing, I'm myself looking forward to listen to the stalwarts, especially when it's a case-based discussion. It probably reaches and it imprints in your mind that how the case has to be managed. So I am glad about it that both the endometriosis committee and Dr. Angela has decided that it should be case based. So I am myself going to take a couple of messages from here. So that's the thing. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak something.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your great words. Now Nina, uh, now it's my honor and privilege to welcome our president, Dr. Achla Batra. You all know she is our current president of AOGT. She is a professor, Department of Obstetrics and Gynae, Vardhaman Medical College and Safdarjung Hospital. She was a past president, NARCHI, and we know we had a great conferences under her leadership. She was a past chairperson of Urogynecology Committee also, and she is a teacher of postgraduates and undergraduates from last 35 years. And she has been honorary secretary of AOGD, ex-editor AOGD, NARCHI. She is a coordinator for FOXY Critical Care Conference. And I will request Dr. Achla Batra to say a few words. Dr. Achla.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you very much for the kind words. Dr. Sharda Jan, ma'am, my respects to you and all other members of the endometriosis committee who are there. And I'm very happy that we are doing it together with the DGFS because that is how our strength and our, range increases when we do things together. So endometriosis, I think Dr. Shadat and ma'am has said a lot about it, and we all know that endometriosis in adolescent is something which is enigmatic because most of the studies have been done in adults and that have been extrapolated to adolescent. But problem and pathology in an adolescent is different. Even when you do decide to do laparoscopy, you have to know what the picture in adolescent is going to be like. It's not the same as in adults. And the psychosocial problem of these little girls who have started with pain now and probably they will have this problem their whole life, sometimes cured, sometimes not cured. So that also has to be taken care of because it leads to depression, schizophrenia, behavior problems. So I think the cases, I'm sure, very good way to talk about endometriosis is through case because you can't talk in theory about endometriosis because there are different presentations. The very good selection of presenting it, Angela. I congratulate you and Nina and everybody else who has conceived it, and I'm sure we are all going to learn something from it. And wishing this webinar a great success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Achla. Thank you so much for your kind words. So without wasting any time, I will hand over this to Kanika to proceed with the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So I would take an honor to welcome our experts, Dr. Malvika Sabharwal, ma'am. She is the Padma Shri awardee, and she is the chief of the Department of Obs and Gynae, Jeevan Mala Hospital and Apollo Spectra Hospital, and she is the founder chairperson of the Delhi State IAGE and president of Delhi Gynecologist Forum, and she has been awarded Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Excellence Award and also Dr. Satya Paul Award. Welcome, ma'am. And I would like to welcome our chairpersons also. And welcome Dr. Kiran Guleria ma'am. She's the director, professor and unit head of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, UCMS and GTB Hospital. She is the vice president of the AOGD 2017 to 18, and she has multiple awards and recognition to her credit. And Dr. Meenakshi Ahuja ma'am, I would like to welcome you. She is the director of the Fortis Lafam Hospital, and she is the president of the Indian Menopausal Society, and has been a speaker at FOXI, AOFOG, and public forums. And she was the past president of DGFS as well. Welcome you, ma'am. I would like to welcome Dr. Anita Rajoria as well, and she is the senior consultant and the head of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel Hospital, Government of NCT of Delhi. She has been affiliated to multiple institutes and has various achievements to her name. And she has been awarded Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Appreciation Award and various other FOXI awards as well. Welcome all the chairpersons. I would like to welcome my moderators. And I would like to welcome Dr. Reena ma'am. She is the director, professor, and unit head of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Lady Hardinge Medical College, New Delhi. And Dr. Neena Bahel ma'am. She is the director of the Obstetrics and Gynecology Department, Fortis Lafam, and is the associate director of the Minimal Access Surgery of the Gynae Department of the Fortis Memorial Research Institute, Gurgaon. Welcome to my moderators, and I would like to extend my welcome to all my panelists. Dr. Indu Chawla ma'am, she is the professor and the consultant of the Atal Bihari Vajpayee Institute of Medical Sciences and Dr. RML Hospital, New Delhi. Welcome, ma'am. Dr. Neena Singh ma'am, she is the consultant gynecologic robotic surgery in the Fortis ICRS, New Delhi, and the senior gynecologist endoscopic surgeon at Fortis Lafam GK2. Welcome, ma'am. And also, I would like to welcome Dr. Sonia Naik, ma'am. She is the director and unit head, Max Super Speciality Hospital, Saket, and she is the executive member of the Endometriosis and Endoscopy Committee, AOGD. Dr. Rita Mahe, ma'am. She is the additional professor, Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. And Dr. Mamta Mishra, ma'am, she is the director of the Obstetrics and Gynecology Department in Fortis Hospital, Vasant Kunj. She has various books to her credit. Welcome, ma'am. I would like to welcome Dr. Glossy Sabharwal, ma'am. She is the chief radiologist and head of the department of the Jeevan Mala Hospital in Wish Diagnostic, and she is the chief consultant at the Apollo Spectra Hospital with various multiple publications to her name. I would like to welcome all my moderators and my panelists. And I would like to welcome Dr. Kiran ma'am to give opening comments to the panel discussion.
A very good afternoon to everybody, and my thanks to my dear friend Angela for picking me up as a committee member, and also my thanks to team AOGD, who's and led by Dr. Achla, for doing these collaborative programs. Now, I think the topic has been very well introduced by Dr. Sharda Jain ma'am. So I think now there is no doubt that adolescent endometriosis has emerged as a specific disease entity. When you compare it vis-a-vis like adult endometriosis, as you know, it not only ruins the youth of prime youth time of our adolescents, but also has long-term implications in the form of, infertility or chronic pelvic pain, especially if it is not kind of treated on time. And it is also emerging as a very common cause of the secondary dysmenorrhea, which does not respond to NSAIDs or to oral contraceptives or other hormonal therapies, which are given for 3 to 6 months. And actually, this is a very good indicator to the clinicians that, we may be dealing here with some adolescent endometriosis. Now, I think the important point is that once we are taking the history, very important to concentrate on family history, which we normally tend to forget, and also some history which points towards Mullerian obstructive anomaly, and rule out pregnancy complications. This is specifically for adolescents. as Madam Dr. Jain has already said, no laparoscopy. So I think I agree with her. There are a lot of imaging modalities these days, and we can, with almost, Glossy is probably going to tell us also, that with with lot of certainty, we can make the diagnosis, and even before, so the need for the surgery would be in a very, very minimal cases. But yes, if you do need to do laparoscopy, I think you need to have a skilled laparoscopist to pick up the findings in adolescents, because they are different from what you see in the adult endometriosis. So I think I will just would like to hear more from the experts. So I would not go too much into detail, because the aim of the treatment here actually remains the symptom relief, suppression and prevention of progression of the disease, and protection of the future fertility in adolescents. So that is very important, and you need to individualize the treatment whenever you have such a case in front of you, and probably in the cases which they will discuss, you will know how to individualize the treatment depending on the various needs or the choices of the patient. And most importantly, as has been stressed by everybody, that this psychological aspect has to be understood, but also of the family, so that we need to form some great psychological support group for them. So I'm also looking forward to the discussions and whatever the take-home messages are. As now today we have a galaxy of star speakers, and to also very learned experts who would also give their opinion regarding the cases. So thank you very much. And with that, I would like to hand over to the organizers. I think Dr. Kanika or Dr. Nina.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Guleria. I think you summed it up in the beginning only. So I'm very fond of this particular adage, he who knows endometriosis knows gynecology. So as enigmatic as it is, so I would say one step further, he who knows is adolescent endometriosis is the topper of the batch. So let's not waste time. I would start. What I'm going to do now is we'll just quickly overview the subject in short time, so that when we go on to the case discussion, we have all the knowledge, and then we know how to use it for this particular case. So as Dr. Sharda Jain very correctly said, that it takes a lot of time before the correct diagnosis is made. On an average, it almost takes 4 to 7 years for the correct diagnosis to be made. It is a disease which may or may not be picked up. There's a lot of taboo to dysmenorrhea in our society. Girls may not come out with their problem of dysmenorrhea, dyspareunia, and the disease is likely to be missed. So Dr. Sonia, I would just like to ask you, how frequently do you encounter in your practice a patient with dysmenorrhea and further progressing on to endometriosis?
So Nina, I mean, we haven't actually followed up these cases as of now, because we've been just going through that evolution where we are understanding endometriosis now more, and we have understood that because of the new emerging, more medical conservative managements of the endometriosis, now we have realized that laparoscopy is not the only answer to it. So, I mean, we need to follow up these girls more, because we know that in our practice, most of the adolescent girls will come up with severe dysmenorrhea and will not have any findings on the ultrasound whatsoever and on clinical examination. But these are the girls we know, we suspect them that they might end up with endometriosis. But I think now with the emerging trends and all, we need to follow up whether they really have endometriosis or DIE later.
Absolutely. See, basically the thing is 1 in 10 out of adult population is suffering from endometriosis, which is a huge burden onto the society. The number of days which are lost without work every month is such a huge thing. So, and if you see the girls who have severe dysmenorrhea, if you eventually, who are not responding to NSAIDs and OCPs, if you go on and take them up for laparoscopy, 70% of these patients will have some kind of lesion if you see on laparoscopy. So it is a huge burden, but the actual numbers will never be able to come out. But if you see in your own study, when we were studying 30 years ago, when I was doing MD, the chapter of endometriosis was turned like this, all pages, only few lines underlined, because it is a disease of the royalty and the queens and the duchess are going to have it. But now we see that it is very, very common, more common than we what perceived it to be. So Dr. Sonia, just for the clearance of the subject, what do we understand by primary dysmenorrhea and secondary dysmenorrhea?
So as we have all seen, Nina, in our practice nowadays, that the girls come up with dysmenorrhea, and we used to actually understand these terms primary and secondary. Primary means starting from menarche, secondary which develops later on. But over here, what we have to understand is primary dysmenorrhea means there's no pathology. So there's dysmenorrhea not associated with any pelvic pathology. So therefore, it generally originates from the menarche or a few months after menarche, usually 6 months when the ovulatory cycles they start and when the prostaglandins they start releasing, and therefore it starts.
Absolutely right. When the prostaglandins and leukotrienes they are released, they are the inflammatory markers. They are the cause of pain in primary dysmenorrhea, and we may or may not see anything either on the ultrasound, MRI, diagnostic lab. Yet these girls suffer, and basically initially we have to manage them similarly as whether it is primary or due to endometriosis. We have to follow up these girls very carefully with primary dysmenorrhea.
So I think, Nina, and these are the girls, probably they will end up with secondary dysmenorrhea a few years later, and we'll have findings in there. So the first question that you asked, and so we'll have to follow up with them.
So what could be the causes of secondary dysmenorrhea?
So yeah, so when we actually evaluate these girls, where we have to rule out other causes. I mean, we know when we see an adolescent girl, our first thing is whether probably she is having any inflammatory disorder or torsion or endometriosis. But then we have to evaluate the rest of the disorders also, and we have to rule out other problems of secondary dysmenorrhea like adenomyosis, ovarian cysts, uterine polyps, myomas, pelvic inflammatory disease.
Yes. And endometriosis is a very, very, very common cause of secondary dysmenorrhea. We should always keep a very high index of suspicion in these young girls, because most of the times on ultrasound, nothing will be picked up. Only during a lab, maybe you'll see some clear white vesicles or red flame-like lesions. Congenital obstructive Mullerian malformations, these are very common causes of secondary dysmenorrhea. And
almost
they
5% will have them.
Endometriosis. And luckily, these ones, they are very amenable to treatment. Once you treatment, if she's operated upon, the dysmenorrhea just goes away. If there's a rudimentary horn, you chop it off, the dysmenorrhea will go for these patients. Active rudimentary horn. Yes, of course, ovarian cyst and polyps and leiomyomata. And of course, like Dr. Kiran Guleria said, that we should not think that these are young girls, they may or may not be sexually active. Our suspicion should be high. It could be a pregnancy complication if the patient is pregnant, presenting with some kind of pain, definitely. Now, what specifically would you like in a younger girl in your history? When you take the history, what things would guide you that this could be, she could be a case of endometriosis and not primary dysmenorrhea?
Yeah, so I mean, as we have all seen in our practice, and if in case we think about these cases, usually these are the cases, these adolescent girls, if you ask them the history, they'll always give a history of early menarche, prolonged or heavier cycles.
True.
And they will generally be lean. So if you observe them, they'll be on the leaner side. So girls having early menarche, and also if in case when we ask them, when the mothers accompany, we ask them of the family history of the sister or the mother will also probably give a history of endometriosis. And now
exactly, that's what Dr. Guleria pointed towards. Yes.
Yeah. So now with the younger new generation now, because we've all had so many years of practice that we delivered those girls now who are now adolescents, and the mothers come up with that, oh, I had endometriosis, whether my daughter will have endometriosis because she's having this sort of a dysmenorrhea. So now we're getting those sort of patients also now.
And interestingly, these patients often give history of asthma and migraine. This is a point to be noted.
Some inflammatory disorders, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease.
Yes, inflammatory disorders and low immunity related SLE, etc. also. But yes, you're right. Lean girls tend to have more than of these ones.
And
And
initially they will have
yes,
cyclical pain and then the pain becomes persistent or acyclical. So
yes.
very typically they'll give a cyclical pain, history of a cyclical pain, and then later on the pain is persistent.
Absolutely. 2/3 of the girls, they will have a combination of cyclical and acyclical pain. In fact, these are the young girls who keep on jumping from one doctor to the other. They could be going to a gastroenterologist, sometimes to a physician. You know, they carry a big file sometimes before the correct diagnosis is made. So if it's a good idea, if an adolescent girl is suffering from some kind of pain abdomen, a gynae checkup is a must, and you should have high index of suspicion, because these kind of girls, you know, they could be regular absentees from school. Every 4 to 5 days in a month, they could be absent from school. This is one very important point in the history which we should be taking. And of course, we should not just tell these girls that chronic pelvic pain is normal. Chronic pelvic pain is not normal. We should not just say that, okay, take a tablet of Meftal Spas or a Crocin, take hot water bottle and just attend your school. So she should be investigated. We should not just dismiss her away that everybody has dysmenorrhea. Once you have children, this will go away. That is what, you know, is common in a lot of people's mind, that once she bears children, this pain will go away. Till then, let her suffer. It's not to be treated like that. And of course, sometimes urinary and bowel symptoms and atypical symptoms are very common with deep infiltrating endometriosis. But in adolescents, luckily, deep infiltrated endometriosis is much rare as compared to small lesions.
Yeah, generally we find grade 1 and grade 2 endometriosis. Generally, they are milder endometriosis in adolescents.
Yes.
And as you said very rightly, I mean, regular absentee from school, I mean, that's a very, important feature that we have to think about, because in spite of NSAID, in spite of any analgesics, if they're still actually having, they have to take a leave from the school or from the office, I mean, it's an important feature. That means we actually have to think of something which is more serious than just a disorder.
Yes, she could not be shamming it always. There could be definitely a problem. So how do you diagnose endometriosis in adolescents? Once it comes to your mind, you know, is there something like all the time, you know, there are facility of ultrasound, tumor markers. People are very fond of getting CA-125 done. I have seen on a lot of prescriptions in young girls, CA-125, that, you know, yesterday also a girl came to me with CA, she got a package done, routine health package done, in which CA-125 was included. And then she came and started crying, my CA-125 is high. So what, am I suffering from a cancer or something else? So what is your take on the whole thing?
Yes, so over here, we should definitely first evaluate or examine these patients, because first thing is we have to rule out any other problems with the pain, any chronic pelvic pain. So to exclude chronic pelvic pain, do an examination for these girls. If required, if she's comfortable, a per rectal examination, or if she's sexually active, even a per vaginal and a per speculum examination. And then coming up to the diagnosis. So like in per speculum and per vaginal, okay, yeah, I mean, to see some obvious bluish nodules in a per speculum is very rare. I mean, you will not find in these girls. But again, a nodularity in the pouch of Douglas, again, that is not so, it's not so advanced disease in adolescents. Again, you will not find these sort of things. But yes, if in case the speculum examination hurts, or when she complains of dyspareunia, that means there is endometriosis in the uterosacral ligaments. If she's complaining, I mean, if she has complaints more specific of like when she has pain and defecation, that means there's some involvement of the rectovaginal septum. So that is how you have to think about in the history of them. Each and every point is important, whether it proceeded from primary to secondary dysmenorrhea, you've excluded other causes, and then about the specific pain that she's pointing out.
Yes, so although bimanual examination in adolescents who are not sexually active, it is not essential to do it. But then if she's sexually active, you can do it. For rectal is better, definitely. And yes, we can go in for diagnostic modalities, not only to diagnose particularly, but to exclude other problems. And with the CA-125, which I specifically pointed out here, was the reason being that in adolescent girls, or as such, CA-125 should not be taken as diagnostic of endometriosis. We should not even be getting this test done at all. But inadvertently, I've seen surgeons in remote areas chopping off ovaries it could be little functional cyst with CA-125 raised, and the fear of cancer and endometriosis. Although none of us are going to do it here, but I think it's a practice which should be discouraged to do CA-125.
Nina, they just get the CA-125 done during the menstruation, during
Yes.
their periods, and it comes out so high. I mean, I've seen, the value going up by almost 150 or 200. And when you get it done after the cycles, it's like almost the normal range.
Absolutely. So it doesn't
Like the
hold
way you were
any.
talking about the routine package. I mean, she
Yes.
must have done it during that time.
So how when we say that it is not, you won't be able to see most of the times on ultrasound, and you're not supposed to get CA-125 done, then how are we going to establish that, and how to start treatment? And I mean, what is the criteria of establishing a diagnosis and starting the treatment in these girls?
Yeah, so that is what these are the girls in which we'll never find any findings. Very rarely we'll find any findings on the ultrasound. And then MRI also has a very limited role because it's just grade 1 to grade 2 endometriosis involving probably somewhat peritoneum. And therefore we don't have any such measures. But over here, therefore, the clinical examining, the history is the most important thing. Your history gives us a lot of clues over here. And then we start with the first line drug therapy. We start with the NSAIDs. Then we go on to oral contraceptive pills. Then it's a choice whether we go on to oral contraceptive pills and then to the progestin therapy, and thereon we go step by step. But over here we have to evaluate. Suppose, it happened, it just happened with my daughter. She was giving 12th class and we were having a severe dysmenorrhea with her. Now you think, knowing that she might develop endometriosis, whether OCPs is the right treatment or not. But yes, initially giving OCPs at least tells you, if it just disseminates the primary dysmenorrhea. So if it is because of prostaglandins and it just goes away, it's probably just dysmenorrhea, but it's still there in spite of giving OCPs, the dysmenorrhea is still there. Then you should think beyond. It's just not just the simple dysmenorrhea because of the prostaglandins and cytokines, but it is probably endometriosis developing, and these are the girls to be followed. And probably over here, you might have to take a decision whether you want to continue with the OCPs or you want to switch over to the progestins. Because there are now theories, especially the chaperone said, like giving OCPs probably might actually increase the endometriosis than solving it, because now the theory is that it is a progesterone resistant condition.
So basically, the thing is that we should be aware that the ultrasound has its limitations, because ultrasound cannot pick up deep infiltrating endometriosis, number one, vaginal nodularities, number two. MRI is the modality which is more sensitive, but MRI is not to be done as a first line of treatment. Only, number one, ultrasound may not pick up anything, but still you need to start treatment. MRI, definitely, if you are still suspecting that it could be deep infiltrating, of course. For the posterior compartment, MRI is more sensitive. For to pick up endometriomas, probably ultrasound and MRI would work equally. So, and as Dr. Sharda ma'am has said, laparoscopy is not to be used as a diagnostic modality, unlike what we used to study, that laparoscopy is the gold standard to pick up endometriosis for adolescents. This is not to be used just to pick up. If at all you have to use laparoscopy at a certain point of time, it is to be one time only, so that you diagnose and you treat, and then you put her onto medical treatment also. So I see both ASHRAE as well as WES, World Endometriosis Society, has said that yes, we can use progestins as first line of treatment in young girls. So OCs, definitely they have been used for a very, very long time. For last 50 years, we've all used them. But I would like to ask Dr. Glossy one thing. Dr. Glossy, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
So Dr. Glossy, when as clinicians we write ultrasound, we know that in adolescents we can't do ultrasound, TVS ultrasound, which is best to pick up endometriosis. So what kind of ultrasound do you think we should be writing on our prescription when we send the patient across to you for ultrasound?
Thank you so much. So most of the things have been very beautifully covered already, but here I would like to emphasize point-wise that number one thing, pelvic imaging should be offered to all the adolescents suspected or having a high suspicion or having even a pelvic pain, because pelvic imaging with an ultrasound does not involve any radiation. It is economical to be offered to the patient. It is easily available in our country. Unfortunately, we do not have enough research, enough study on Indian population per se to come up with this, and what we follow are what is happening outside of India, because the research is done there better, and according to them ultrasound is never the first modality because it's not easily available. In India, it is available, therefore it should be offered. Number one thing, if we can schedule the ultrasound, then it is very important to give the child, adolescent girl, a bowel preparation a night before. Whenever we are suspecting that it could be endometriosis, we know that there are three patterns to it. There is a peritoneal disease, there is ovarian, and then there is rectosigmoid, the most common patterns. So if we are suspecting that, and ovarian endometriomas are not common in adolescents, they are less common as compared to the other factors. So we have to get the bladder full, we have to get the bowel preparation, because with that we'll be able to see per abdomen better. Then another thing which is very important is that when you are writing, as your question was, that what to write, you should always be writing ultrasound pelvis with full bladder, but to exclude endometriosis as a spectrum and not ovarian cyst. Because usually what happens, when I get a prescription, I see rule out ovarian cyst. We have to rule out Mullerian anomalies. We have to rule out agenesis. We have to rule out didelphys with rudimentary horn. We have to rule out all of that in chronic pelvic pain, in secondary dysmenorrhea, primary dysmenorrhea. So it should be an umbrella approach. Then bowel preparation has to be there. Now TVS we cannot do, but the best modality that we can use, even better, it has been proven to be better than MRI, is the TRUS ultrasound, a transrectal ultrasound. We have to counsel. We have to, if it's a schedule, do a bowel preparation before that. Otherwise, even if there is no bowel preparation, a transrectal ultrasound done in the right way is very, very informative. We have picked up lesions as small as 5 to 6 millimeters, because it is very clearly seen in adolescents, in young girls. So TRUS ultrasound should be written. When you are writing, you can always yourself, because when a patient comes from your OPD
She needs to be counseled that the probe would be
Yes.
put in your rectum, because otherwise the girl becomes very nervous. Where is she putting the
Yes,
probe?
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So bowel preparation and transrectal. Then one thing more I want to point out here is that MRI, if you talk about the routine MRI, what we used to do earlier, MRI pelvis, that definitely does not, it has a limited role. But these days we also started doing MRI with a jelly method. So you can always speak to the radiologist where you are sending that please do MRI with the jelly method. It is very simple. It's the same ultrasound jelly, but the jelly is being put a little bit into the vagina, not deep inside, and a little jelly is put into the rectum. So we get those nozzles, we put little jelly in the rectum and little jelly in the vagina, and then we do the MRI, because that picks up rectosigmoid and DIE lesions way better than a routine MRI. So it's a simple thing. If somebody writes it down, then it's done better. Otherwise, radiologists like to do it themselves also. So that way MRI is better. But number one is ultrasound, and that too TRUS ultrasound or ultrasound with bowel preparation is the best modality.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Glossy. That was very enlightening, I think. So a lot of the times we write something and we don't know what to expect when the result comes. So these slides, they are shared by Dr. Glossy. So Dr. Glossy, can you just comment on these slides?
Yeah, unfortunately, we never had so many adolescent girls coming to us. So these are the slides of married, sexually active women, in which a transvaginal ultrasound is showing. If you can see, the first half of the image shows an ovary, and there is a cyst within the ovary, which is a typical endometriotic cyst. We all know ground glass appearance, the walls are thick and regular, there are no papillary projections. There could be locules, but there are no papillary projections. in the endometriotic cyst. The second half of the image that shows that the right adnexa has a hypoechoic, a black lesion which is being measured. That is the deep infiltrating endometriosis. So that lesion also we had picked up. Then we also got.
Glossy, I think we'll have to rush through it because there's a lot of things to be left.
Let's
what I
get
would
on to
like
the
to
next
just
image.
like to say is that the endometriomas and deep infiltrating is not so common in adolescents,
Yes.
which can be easily picked up on the ultrasound. And
yeah, so this last case, I would just one slide back, ma'am. I would like to say this patient was unmarried, and we did this. It turned out to be primary umbilical endometriosis. This was an umbilical nodule, and the patient came to us with no previous history. An African lady, she was in her 30s and 40s, but she was not sexually active, never had surgery, with bleeding umbilical nodule. It turned out to be endometriosis, primary umbilical endometriosis. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Glossy, so much. So basically, there's just one important thing here I would like to add before I hand it over to Dr. Reena for her cases. So Dr. Sonia, if you incidentally see a 4-centimeter endometrioma, would you like to go ahead and do something for it, or just wait and watch over it? One line response.
So where I'll give her a medical treatment, because I will be careful about her fertility rate later.
Yes, absolutely. We are not going to do laparoscopy for this. If there is endometrioma 4, 5, or even 6 centimeter, we would like to go in for medical treatment in such cases and not try to do either surgery. And we can't, even if she's asymptomatic, we'll just not leave her alone, because expectant management has no role. It can be a progressive thing. So basically the medical management Dr. Reena would be taking up in her cases. I would like to just call in Dr. Neena Singh.
Hi.
Dr. Neena, are you there?
I'm on. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So basically NSAIDs, of course, before we go on to the laparoscopic part, if at all required, we have to know that we've done full justice with our NSAIDs. No point giving 1 or 2 tablets of paracetamol. It is important to make the full dose of ibuprofen or naproxen or mefenamic acid, whatever you are using, use it in full dose. And there is no harm in using these repetitively every month also if they give relief. But make sure that the adolescent girls, she takes it with plenty of water, and definitely because the gastric ulcers are very common with NSAIDs. The only thing to be remembered here is that no opioids and no tramadol should be given in adolescent girls, because even in 8 to 10 days, it can lead to habit forming in these young girls. So no opioids, no tramadol. First line is NSAIDs with plenty of water, full stomach. And I think Dr. Reena will discuss it in detail, when to start OCP, whether to go in for OCP or Dynogest, because we have a lot of options available. We have OCPs, we have Dynogest, we have GnRH analogs, we have Mirena. So there is a spectrum. When to use which, let's all come to it slowly, because Dynogest, as we know, is a newer molecule, is favorite of all the gynecologists these days. And for a reason, because it actually regresses the disease rather than OCPs, which just give symptomatic relief and do nothing to regress the disease. So, but Dynogest has not been studied against vis-a-vis OCPs, but a prospective trial is going on. We'll in some time come to know what is the result with Dynogest as compared to OCPs. But Dynogest on its own, we know that it works well at 2 milligram. Initially, it may be given in 4 milligram morning, evening to suppress the thing, and then for a longer period of time, 2 milligram. It doesn't help to increase the dose of Dynogest, that doesn't work. And in 1 milligram, it doesn't show any regression of the disease. So when does, Dr. Neena, when does laparoscopy come in adolescents? We've all been saying no laparoscopy, but I'm sure there would be some indication for laparoscopy.
Yeah, so thanks for this posting this question. It's important for us all to know, as adolescent laparoscopy is not the first gold standard of any diagnosis, but we are compelled to do laparoscopy in adolescent endometriosis in certain conditions. Number one would be that, as you have just narrated, that the patient has been having severe dysmenorrhea. She's a young girl and she has been given proper dose of NAS, your pain relievers. We have also given them OCPs, or we have given her till OCPs, and she's not being relieved. So anything which is failed medical management would lead to laparoscopy finally, because we have to find her answer to her pain, number one. Number two, if there is any sudden increase in the size of endometrioma, which we have already been seeing, as you said, 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters, and then her pain is persistent, she is not responsive to medical treatment, whether it is OCPs, whether it is Dynogest, whether it is GnRH, and there is a sudden increase in the size of an endometrioma, I must go in for a laparoscopy. She has pressure symptoms like on the rectum or on the bladder, or she is the one who is complaining of cyclical rectal bleeding during her periods, a cyclical urinary bleed during her periods. Obviously, there is a diagnosis which is a misfit for the medical management, and we need to explore her further with our diagnostic modalities to understand. The diagnosis is not very clear. The
Sometimes
patient doesn't.
also when the diagnosis is not clear, if it
Very
is
clear.
Mullerian agenesis or active rudimentary horn.
So then we will have to go, and
Yes.
then suspicion of malignancy. So that is again exponential size.
Absolutely. So before and laparoscopy, one line of caution, it is a good idea to do AMH before and after, so that you for your own self know how much damage you've done in surgery. So the surgeon should be experienced, and a long-term follow-up even after laparoscopy is must. It is not that you do laparoscopy and you just leave it at that. Whether you follow up with whatever medical modality we'll be discussing later on, it is must. So here, what I would like to ask you, Dr. Neena, what is the difference between the presentation in laparoscopy in adolescents and in adults? How does that differ?
Yeah, as we know that the endometriosis can be of 3 types. We have peritoneal endometriosis, we have got ovarian endometriomas, we have deep infiltrating endometriosis, and in adolescents, we normally find peritoneal lesions only, and their deep infiltrating is seldom seen in these girls. And when you put in a laparoscope, the diagnostic dilemma remains, because they are not those typical, brown lesions. They can be slightly red, they can be vesicular, they can be white lesions, there can be peritoneal defects. So the diagnosis becomes difficult. Examining under magnification is important. Just knowing that vision is important. You have to look for clear vesicles as well. So that is an important atypical presentations with these girls have. If they're endometriomas, of course, it's visible. If there is a fibrosis, they do not have much fibrosis. And these lesions are, why they are vesicular, why they are white, and they are not typically brown, because it is the hemosiderin content. So hemosiderin content comes specifically when there are repetitive bleeds. They are the initial ones. So they are always clear ones. Later on, 5 years, 10 years henceforth, they will also become the same brown spots, which we'll be able to diagnose. So diagnostic dilemma does happen in laparoscopy, and we have to use magnification techniques with the.
So this is typically what we call magnification technique on laparoscopy. We go very near to the lesion, almost 1 to 2 millimeter near the lesion, the scope is taken. Secondly, what we can do is we can fill in the pelvis with saline, and this is called diving in technique. We put in a scope as deep into the saline filled pelvis, and then try to pick up the lesions. Then we suck out this saline, and then we take small biopsies. So it is best to treat these lesions in the same go. If we see on laparoscopy, see, as we say that 70% of the females who have symptoms would be showing this some kind of atypical lesions. And out of these, if we take biopsies from atypical lesions, 30% will show endometriosis. And even if the pelvis is clear and we take a small biopsy from pouch of Douglas, 3% of these patients will show some kind of endometriosis in microscopic thing. So it is important to do it in, the job should be done complete when you're looking at this. And important point is when you, in these, we should not be doing stripping of the endometrium, because it can lead to a lot of adhesion formations in young girls. Even in deep infiltrating ones, we should not be doing too much of a dissection. We should be just taking biopsies, because repeated surgeries can lead to repeated adhesions, and the problems are going to compound. The more you strip the peritoneum, the more adhesions formation is there in adolescents. But it is important to take biopsies. Fulguration should be done definitely. The electrocautery should be kept at minimum while doing fulguration in younger girls. And also, if you need to remove endometriomas also, the minimum fulguration should be done. The current should be at a low, small spurts, bursts of current should be given. Little bit of vasopressin can be injected to stop the bleeding. And preferably the base of the endometrioma should not be removed, just as Donna says, leave it a little bit so that the follicles are not damaged. So
I would just like to add another thing, that 3D laparoscopy and the robotics has also added to the depth and the clarity of these lesions. And the narrowband imaging, which has also come up with this 3D apparatuses, because it's an inbuilt thing, it is much easier for us, because there are two bands, 410 and 540, which have the penetration level to give you the depth of these lesions. So that also is very, very handy if one has a 3D or robotics.
absolutely, well said. So I would like to give over to Dr. Reena. Let's start with the case discussions, and then our experts will give their comments.
Reena, please stop sharing your screen.
Yeah, over to you, Dr. Reena.
Can I come in for a second, Nina?
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to add that you had discussed each and everything very clearly. We have to be, we can't be oblivious of the red alert sign when the patient is not responding. We should have a strong suspicion for endometriosis. Another thing which this case has been, it has been very well highlighted, that despite improvement in symptoms, patient can still have a progressive endometriotic disease. So
that's what Dr. Reena is going to discuss in detail.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's listen to her case and then we'll go ahead. I think Dr. Reena has a very interesting case. Yeah.
Can I start now, Nina?
Yeah, of course, start, Dr. Reena.
But Nina, I wonder, because most of the things you have already discussed, I hope it's not boring for the people.
No. I think, but because they have a quiz at the end, so they'll better be attentive, if not in first and the second session. That will be helpful for everybody around.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I think I'll not be going into the introduction part, but one thing I want to say, there are reports which say that origin of adolescent early onset endometriosis is different as compared to the adult onset this thing. And they say the origin is in the newborn period itself, that some cells are I'm not going into the too much theoretical detail of all those things. Nina has just discussed most of the things, and prevalence, as you know, exact prevalence there is one question in the chat box that what is the prevalence in adolescent. Actually, exact prevalence is difficult to judge in adolescent because not many studies are there. Whatever studies are there in the adult population is there. But it is well known that when the patient comes with chronic pelvic pain, which is not responding to, almost 70% are because of endometriosis. And this was a very big study, which they have 15 articles they have taken into account, and they found 75% of the ladies, adolescents were having endometriosis. This, as far as the symptomatology is concerned, this has already been highlighted, that symptoms, peritoneal lesions, endometrioma, all are different as compared to the adult presentation. And the most common is you should always rule out the obstructive anomalies as far as the severe dysmenorrhea in adolescent is concerned. And there is large variability in the revised classification. And as you know, previous studies used to say that stage 1 and 2 is much more common. But latest publication in the seminars of reproductive medicine shows that though more recent, they show that prevalence of advanced stage endometriosis also is not uncommon in adolescents. Goal of therapy, I think everybody knows that we don't have any cure, because we don't know the exact reason why it is happening. Till that time, it will be a palliative therapy, whether it is surgical or medical. Main aim is the symptomatic relief, suppression of the disease progression, and of course the protection of. Then coming on to the case, this was a case presented to us in 2016. She was a 17-year-old lady. She was a student of 11th class. And her menarche was at 12 years of age. Her menstrual cycle was absolutely normal. Moderate flow was there. And she was having dysmenorrhea for the last 5 years. And now she presented to us that severe dysmenorrhea for last 2 years, which lasts for 5 to 7 days, even after the menstrual cycles were over. Bleeding was over, and it was not relieved by usual analgesic, and she always she has to take injectables. And this was and throughout the cycle she used to say the dull ache pain abdomen, which is there for the last 7 months. And she was being absenting herself from the school, and there was no urinary and bowel trouble. There was no history of fever or any discharge. She was not sexually active. And though she was prescribed NSAID painkillers, she used to take injectable, most of the time tramadol. And history of OC pills, she was taking irregularly, which was not, she was not responding to that treatment. So my question for Dr. Indu Chawla is what all relevant history would you inquire, and what are the risk factors? Of course, I think I should skip this thing. Dr. Indu, are you there? Because these have been discussed in quite detail.
Thanks, Dr. Reena, AOGD, and Delhi Gynae Forum for involving me in this panel discussion. So I think I would like to discuss, because it's important, history is very important, as it has been said that we may not get anything in the imaging. We might have to decide treatment on history itself. So I would spend some time again taking history. So here's a 17-year-old girl who's presented with dysmenorrhea of increasing severity 1, chronic pelvic pain for 7 months, and she's been absenting from school. That means, she's troubled. She's been absenting from school. So time has come that we investigate her for some organic cause of dysmenorrhea. So though you had told me that there are no urinary or bowel complaints, but I would again ask her specifically, does she have history of dyschezia, dysuria, hematuria, cyclical or non-cyclical, any rectal bleed? If she has she undergone some surgery? Like I have one patient, it was operated by urologist 2 years back for ectopic ureter, and now she's landed with me with Mullerian anomaly and a huge size endometrioma. So what they did, perhaps they missed the diagnosis of, or they didn't look for it. So I would always ask her, does she have any history of surgery? Then a very important history of endometriosis in siblings, mother, because there tends to be familial clustering. And in our country, she's presented with pelvic pain, though dysmenorrhea, and it is pointing towards endometriosis, but I would like to rule out other causes like PID. You said there is no history of discharge baby, and tuberculosis should always be on our mind, and ovarian, maybe a submucous fibroid, and plus I would like to rule out non-gynae causes, gastrointestinal, genitourinary, musculoskeletal, and I would also like to know whether she is sexually active or not. That will help me a lot. Like one, of course, one has to rule out pregnancy. Second, in making the diagnosis and further management. And I would also like to assess her psychologically and what impact she has, which background is she coming from, and it will help me a lot in making the treatment plan for her. So history taking is very, very important in patients of endometriosis. Like I tell my residents, take a stool and sit by the side of the patient, only then you can elicit the history. So it's important to elicit history.
Thank you, Dr. Indu. Very nicely you have pointed out history is very important as far as the pain in the adolescent is concerned, because the main delay in diagnosis is that you ignore the patient. You say that dysmenorrhea is common in this particular age group, and she keeps on roaming between the various medical personnel and all. Family history, of course, is very important, that there is 10-fold increased risk of risk factor. Can you enumerate, or we just skip this thing because it has
already been
discussed? Very
short menstrual cycles, familial history, and migraine, asthma, and of course, it's been seen that it is more common in patients of low BMI, and obese patients somehow are protected, whatever the mechanism. So it's more common in lean patients. Yeah.
History of menarche is very important. If it is less than 12 years, then you should suspect, especially with such histories which is not responding. After 14 years, if somebody has got menarche, or 15 years, they are not at all high risk for developing adolescent endometriosis. So there are various studies which have shown that if the history of migraine is there, then adolescents with endometriosis are more likely to have experienced migraine than adolescents without endometriosis. And a lot of studies have been published, and this is one of the articles like that. Second, which is given is if the history of sexual abuse is there during childhood. And I don't know how they have related, but such a big population, they have studied 62,595, and they have found the association between these two with endometriosis. Then Dr. Indu, what is the, just one line, how is relation of ambularian and obstructed disease with endometriosis?
Yeah,
and what is the course of endometriosis after correction of obstruction?
We see a lot of patients like I enumerated one is admitted with me, and they land up with endometriosis with us. And whenever we operate, we find a large endometrioma. But somehow it's being said that this is a different category altogether, because a large percentage improve after you have operated upon them, and a small percentage, the symptoms might persist, but maybe it's a different category. But we do see a large number of endometriomas, and at times they are associated with hematosalpinx also, So in patients who have obstructive anomalies and there's hematometra. So the association is there, and they do improve. Large percentage do improve.
You're very right, because where there were obstructed anomalies like vaginal agenesis or hematometra is there because of the cervical atresia, and all these people markedly improve after the endometriosis does not recur in almost more than 2/3 of the cases once you remove the obstruction. So just to highlight that classical adult symptoms of cyclical pain present in 9.4%, whereas 28.1% subjects have acyclical pain. And on the whole, acyclical pain is present in adolescents 90.6%, as various studies have shown. A pain diary is useful in documenting the frequency and the character of pain, and whether there are any provoking factors like menses, oval, or bladder, this thing. Dr. Rita is there? Dr. Rita Mahe?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Hello, good afternoon. Hello. What about physical examination, just in nutshell, because it has already been discussed in detail, should be done in an adolescent, non-sexually active girl?
Yes, as Dr. Indu has detailed about the history and which all things we have to ask, I think general physical examination, and we have to see how much she is stressed about the disease, her anxiety levels. It is general physical examination, and that is very important. And then if she is unmarried and not sexually active, then we will not do pervaginal examination. But after a detailed abdominal examination, we have to see if there are any point of tenderness, any abdominal abnormal finding, and local external genitalia, because sometimes you may find some obstructive anomaly. So we have to see whether she may have some problem in the vagina, so which may be the cause of backflow and then endometriosis, because sometimes we have now these new diseases like that Hurling-Wunderland syndrome, like these few things that the patient is menstruating from one side, but there is blockage on the other side, and the other side of hemiuterus. So the backflow is happening, and she is having backflow and endometriosis. So all those things we need to rule out. So detailed examination is very important. So if we are not able to do PV examination, then per rectal examination will help us to look for any tender nodules and any tenderness while doing the examination. So that is important, and so that we can at least to reach to some extent to the diagnosis that how much she is suffering and whether their symptoms are correlating with the actual disease.
Very rightly pointed out, Dr. Rita. Our patient on history, it was as already I have enumerated. On examination, there was nothing remarkable. Only thing was there was tenderness on the right side. There was no mass palpable. Abdomen was absolutely soft. Physical exam, you have very nicely pointed out what all things too should be examined in an unmarried girl.
Yeah, to rule out appendicitis also. We have to rule out appendicitis. Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe.
Okay. Dr. Rita, what investigation should be done in this particular girl? Is there any marker for, I'll be telling in detail about what we have done and what were the findings, but for now it is just a general discussion which have already.
In first line investigations in this patient, I'll order ultrasound. And ultrasound will be whole abdomen and pelvis, because we should not stick only to like she may have some pelvic pathology. Maybe she has some renal colic or some other abdominal pathology. So detailed whole abdomen and pelvis ultrasound is very important. And sometimes there are some pathologies on adolescents which are not able to be picked up on ultrasound. So whether we need to order MRI for this patient or not, that will depend what are the abnormalities we see on ultrasound, because there are other Mullerian anomalies which are which mandate the need of MRI to confirm the findings.
Yeah, definitely. So MRI is not indicated for each and every patient. If ultrasound shows some obstructed anomalies or a doubtful mass is there, then definitely. Otherwise, MRI is not the investigation of choice, or as such, it is just should not be done. As
Yes,
far as
ma'am.
the markers are concerned, which has already been discussed.
Because the way this patient has presented, she has presented with progressively increasing dysmenorrhea. Because in this patient, we should be thinking as a provisional differential diagnosis that she may have some obstructive anomaly.
Definitely. So basically, as per you have already nicely discussed, recently the diagnosis in adolescents should always be made clinically or imaging technique. Histological or laparoscopy is not at all warranted as the first go for the making a diagnosis. It has been discussed very in detail in this thing. Dr. Indu, management options if initial transabdominal sonography does not show any abnormality.
So if we look back at this patient, if transabdominal ultrasound is not showing, and I presume transrectal has also been done if she allows, and there's no abnormality, but on the basis of history, it is pointing that she could be having endometriosis.
Definitely.
So we have to provide symptom relief, suppression of disease progression, and we have to protect her future fertility if it's endometriosis. So right in the beginning, I'll do counseling and tell her that she will need treatment for a long time. There is no cure, and she'll have to take treatment. So first line would be a combination of analgesics, as has already been said, not tramadol, ibuprofen, mefenoic acid and other, but tramadol should not be used, and suppressive hormonal therapy. Though she has already taken OCs irregularly, no harm trying again a combination COCs continuously in the usual dose, that is 30 plus 30 ethinyl estradiol plus gestageol, and then maybe I would like to reassess after a period of 3 to 6 months. And
how will you like to give OCPLs in this particular girl?
I would like to give her continuously, at least 3 months, because her symptoms would decrease if I do withdrawal after every 3 months, So it's in a continuous manner to induce amenorrhea, at least for 3 to 6 months. So that would be my first option.
At what age? She's 17 years old. At what age you should be starting OC pills in a young adolescent girl? What?
Actually, OCPs has estrogen. Like if I was thinking of giving her GnRH, I can't start at a very young age. But OCPs we can give at a young age. To this patient, we can give OCPs. And because she's already attained her bone mass, by 17 years, most of them have attained their bone mass. So OCPs can be given. And the other option is like the new kid on the block, Dynogest. So
Dr. Indu will discuss that later on. OC pills we have been using for a number of conditions like acne, hirsutism. It's not only for contraception, but other conditions it has been in use for in adolescents for decades. But one should note that while starting OC pills, one should remember that it contains estrogen, and the lady has not yet acquired her exact bone strength, that bone mineral density. So if she has attained MINAR, after 3 years of that, it takes that much time. So OC pills used in adolescents can compromise bone mineral acquisition, especially in the first 3 years post MINAR. And it has been shown, even though the OC pills have a very low dose of estrogen, but it has shown in various studies that spine bone mineral density is increased by 2.3% as compared to non-user, whether it was 3.8%. As far as the gains in femoral neck BMD is concerned, that were also significantly lower as compared to the one which were not using OC pills. So that one has to be careful at what age you are starting OC pills. 3 years post menarche, you can comfortably start, but one has to be careful before that, because the bone mass has to be acquired during that particular period. And also it has been shown that the use of, they don't act same as in adult. Although use of these hormones, generally we have seen no effect on on the bone health in adults, but they are different from adolescent, as I have already told you, because the teen years are the critical period for acquiring peak bone strength. So one has to be careful in using quite early in the teenage years. Though this is an association which is seen in various studies, and they have also concluded that further randomized control trial needs to be done if you are going to start OC pills at quite an early age. So ultimately, this review, which has been published in 2020 in Endocrinology Journal, they ultimately concluded that skeletal health of some forms of hormonal contraceptions are greater in adolescent female than in mature women. In particular, combined oral contraceptive and DMPA has been associated with smaller gains or loss of bone mass during the critical period for acquiring bone strength. So not much data available as far as long-acting reversible contraceptives are concerned. So they said more research is needed in to address these particular issues as far as the hormonal contraception are concerned. Dr. Rita, when will the progesterone will be advised? All these are in first-line drugs, whether it is also OC pills, whether NSAID and progesterone, all these are first-line drugs. But when will you advise progestin? Or is there any difference between the various brands of progestins?
Ma'am, actually we have to see the symptom relief. I think we can use this norethistone acetate or medroxyprogesterone acetate. Like in this patient, there is, before starting Dynogest, definitely we can start the first two. And norethistone acetate, they say that it has some component of estrogen, so which is required. So we can think of giving this norethistone acetate, and the dose is 5 to 10 milligrams twice a day. We can give from day 5 to day 25. So which will help, which might help her to relieve the symptoms. So these drugs can be used as first line progesterone. If my patient has not responded, like I have given a trial of 3 to 6 months, then we can switch over to the next drug like Dynogest. And LNG-IO is definitely not for this patient. So, and Netten also, it's only in the patients, those who are not responding, like not the first line of choice.
So there are various studies which have used oral progestins in adolescent, and these particular studies have said that most common indication for starting progestin is the failure of combined oral contraceptive, or if there is any contraindications like migraine with aura and all those things. Because most of the studies have been done in adult population. Adult use in adolescent studies are very low, and this particular study has used norethindrone acetate, and it is well tolerated in adolescent and decreases pain and bleeding and also in adolescent. So and what about DMPA, Rita?
DMPA, we can use it, but again, there are risk of like bone with the decreased BMD with all this and long-term use, and it has side effects like when it is given 3 monthly, then sometimes it causes irregular cycles also, and it affects the bone mineral health also. So, so we have to, if we can give that oral norethistone acetate and medroxyprogesterone acetate, then it is better to avoid DMPA.
Yeah, because it can compromise the expected gain in adolescent by altering the estrogen and insulin growth factors. So one has to be careful. And there was a review which was published and in which they have shown the bone mineral density in younger women, and what they have shown, the history of fracture risk was highest in women less than 30 years of age. Depending on that, they said that based on these findings, they suggested that DMPA should not be used more than 2 years, especially in younger age group. So this was what they concluded from the review. So coming on to the Dynogest, which we are wanted to tell about that. Okay, Rita, Dynogest.
Yes, ma'am. Dynogest, definitely we have so much discussion about Dynogest. It has been shown that it relieves the symptoms also, and it decreases the size of endometrium also. But as an index patient, she is not having any lesion, and she's not having any ovarian endometrioma. So definitely I will not choose Dynogest as my first choice of drug. So I'll give her a trial of either OCPs or progesterone, and I'll review her after 3 to 6 months. If she's not responding, then I might think of giving Dynogest. But before that, I would like to evaluate other organic cause of this because I might go for MRI also. Maybe she has some other pathology.
You're very right. Dynogest will come later on. Okay, LNG you have all outrightly ruled out.
LNG,
okay.
But not for this patient exactly.
Okay, okay. Dr. Indu, indications of GnRH analog in this particular patient?
Okay, she is 17 years and GnRH in adolescents younger than 18 years should not be commonly used unless other things are not working. And I have proven on MRI maybe a deep infiltrating endometriosis or an endometrioma which is not responding. So maybe given, but less than 18 years, not the choice, But before giving GnRH, I'll be 100% sure that the diagnosis is endometriosis. And now the recommendation is like when we give GnRH for other indications, if more than 3 months, we start add-back therapy. But if I have to give to adolescent, I will I'll give add-back therapy right from beginning and maybe not give GnRH if she's not responding or not more than 1 year to this age group. That would be my upper limit. It causes change in bone mineral density. And I'll emphasize that she has to take calcium, she has to do exercise. Right. And if I'm giving it for 1 year, then bone mineral density is not recommended. But by any chance, suppose I have to give it again or something, then maybe after 1 year, I'll get the bone mineral density done because it does cause loss of bone mineral.
Yeah, very nicely explained. DEXA is not indicated. If you are giving more than 1 year, then only it is indicated. FDA has said that normally in adult population for 6 months you are giving, you don't have to add back. But as far as the adolescent population is concerned, you have to, if you have to start, this is second line drug, a level A evidence is there for this particular drug. You have to start add-back therapy simultaneously, not to wait for 6 months or 3 months in order to, because bone mineral density is a big issue in this group of population. Indication of any aromatase inhibitors, is there any indication or is it just to complete the whatever all drugs are there in the aromatase?
I think there's not enough evidence, it does cause regression of symptoms and disease, but I don't think any of us are using as first line, especially.
This is again, if everything is refractory and it has been a confirmed case, then only it's there. So this was a review article or of adolescent. They have included all the drugs whichever there in the armamentarium. They have included danazole also, Gestrin, though we don't use at all danazole because of the so many side effects. Even in adult, we don't use it, but to say of in adolescent population. So other drugs in future medical, I am not going to go into that, but capgolin is coming up, which is a anti-angiogenesis and which some of the people are using in India also, that 0.5 milligram twice a week. So a choice of medication must be individualized. So coming on to the case, now what you people were discussing, that so much intractable, there has to be some lesion. It cannot be without a finding in ultrasonography. This ultrasound was done in our hospital, which shows a uterus anteverted 3.3 into 2.5 centimeter hypoechoic lesion, which is seen in the endometrial cavity. They gave a diagnosis of submucous fibroid and polyp, but this diagnosis was not fitting into her symptoms because she never had a heavy menstrual bleeding and never irregular bleeding. So it was doubtful that really she is having this particular diagnosis. Then we got the MRI also done, which also shows a 3.8 into 4 centimeter lesion on the right lateral aspect of the myometrium, and the diagnosis was given that partially exophytic fibroid with focus and high hemorrhage. So again, it was very doubtful, and she used to have so much of pain, and she was having exam also in the month of March. So we said we can go for laparoscopy because we are not sure what exactly is it, or it may be a Mullerian anomaly also. But she said, no, I want to appear for exam, so do something that she will come after 2 months or 3 months or so, like that. So we put her on MAPRATE for in a continuous fashion. Then she came back to us after, say, after 2 months when her exam were over. She stopped MAPRATE herself, and she has withdrawal bleeding. She has intractable pain. When she come to us, she was doubled up because of the pain, and she has taken some injectable also, but it was not acting at all. So this time we did scan ourselves, and when we see, we all again saw 2 cavities, and one was with looking like a hemorrhage inside that thing. Then I suspected that this may be a bicornuate uterus with a non-communicating heart. So we decided to go ahead with laparoscopy. On laparoscopy, what we saw, uterus was almost 6 weeks size, and there was a bulge on the posterolateral aspect of the uterus. And tubes and ovary was normal, and there was no evidence of anywhere endometriosis, and POD was absolutely clear. We have gone ahead with the operative, and then we give an incision and open it for the chocolate colored fluid on that aspect of the uterus. And we have excised the unhealthy area and that cavity, and hemostasis was achieved. And when we subjected this thing which we have excised from there, it shows that endometrial gland and stroma existed in the cystic lesion, and they were clearly different from surrounding muscular layer. Finding were consistent with cystic adenomyoma, that is juvenile cystic adenomyoma. And we all know this is a very rare condition, and why it occurs, we don't know. And this thing was with medical management. Again, it has been given that you have to try medical management, and if it is not responding, which most of the time it doesn't respond. Yes, Rita, you want to say something?
Yes, ma'am. I want to add, actually, we have published these 4 cases of juvenile cystic adenomyoma. That's why I was saying, like, the way of dysmenorrhea this patient was presenting. So this is a typical presentation of these girls, that they miss school, and it can't be just plain endometriosis. This is a typical presentation of juvenile cystic adenomyoma. So we had published 4 cases of juvenile cystic adenomyoma where either the diagnosis was fibroid or the bicornuate uterus.
Yes.
And I just want to add one point, like how these juvenile cystic adenomyoma are different from the bicornuate uterus and from the fibroid, because initially we were also confused. Dr. Kiplani has done the cases, all the 4 cases when madam was here. So here the lesion is there. It looks
Rita,
like
we have also 2 cases. One was of rudimentary heart, and other was this. Both cases we have published together of severe dysmenorrhea.
Yes,
Dr.
ma'am.
Rita, can I interrupt? Sorry.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
But usually they are diagnosed on ultrasound. A good ultrasonologist should be able to pick up.
Ma'am,
all these
ultrasound.
Yeah.
Ultrasound will tell us submucous fibroid, like ma'am has presented. It is a typical, or they will tell us bicornuate uterus. But it is different from bicornuate uterus, because when you do hysteroscopy of these patients, both the ostia will be visible.
Absolutely.
So Rita, this was an unmarried girl. We never thought of doing a hysteroscopy for her, but if we would have counseled and
or MRI will tell us.
So in young girl, if nothing is responding, then I think there is a role for laparoscopy. I think everybody will agree with me, or
I think a good ultrasound and with a high index of suspicion for other abnormalities.
Yes.
Ma'am, I would like to add here that like Indu ma'am is saying, a good ultrasound, here comes the role of 3D ultrasound. A 3D per abdomen ultrasound will tell you that whether it's a bicornuate, whether there is any connection with the cavity or not. But definitely it has to be done that way. Only then one can know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glossy. Okay, we'll to conclude. First line management everybody has discussed. If not responding, then of course we need to do laparoscopy, and we always should keep a strong possibility of obstructive lesions. So this is just to summarize. I think it's problem with medical management is that it is just a palliative. It's not a curative, and of course, as soon as you stop, the recurrence of the lesion is always there. Then coming on to the second case, I hurriedly go through this thing. A 2-year-old unmarried girl presented with pain abdomen. She has dysmenorrhea as well as acyclic pain. Her past history was she has similar complaint 2 years back, and that time she had a laparoscopic and cystectomy was done for a 7-centimeter endometrioma. Now again she presents with the same complaints of pain and all, and this time again she shows a cyst of 6 centimeters. My question to Dr. Glossy is, what are the varieties of ultrasound appearance on ovarian endometrium?
Ma'am, the typical appearance we all know is a ground glass appearing chocolate cyst with thick regular walls. It's because of the old blood in the cavity, in the cyst. Now, that is the typical appearance. Apart from that, what the IOTA, the International Ovarian Tumor Analysis Society, tells us is that the cyst can also have locule in it and yet be an endometrioma. But how to differentiate the locule and the papilla? It should not be a papillary projection. A papillary projection, if we see in a cyst, then we have to put in a color Doppler, and it should not be picking up any sort of color. No color should come in it. Then we know that it is loculated. It can be loculated. It can have papillae, but the papillae should not have any color on it. And usually it is ground glass, but many times we see there are layering, there are fluid levels seen on ultrasound, and there are debris seen, locule seen, but there should be no solid vascular part within the endometrioma. That is how the typical and atypical we see usually.
Is Doppler indicated in these cases?
Yes. In every case of endometriosis, a pelvic Doppler must be done, because we do not know that whether the papilla is indicative of something else. Also, ovarian torsion should be ruled out, especially in endometriosis when there is exophytic cyst, any adnexal lesion. So a color Doppler is a must, I always feel, and insist on doing it. If you write it down, that's a better thing for us. Otherwise, we as radiologists always prefer doing a color scan.
Thank you, Glossy, for nicely highlighting. Will you be doing in this particular case MRI? Will you be advising, or any other investigation, 3D scan or something like that in this particular case?
In this particular case, it looks like that there is a recurrence. There was a 7 centimeter and then a 6 centimeter. I would first do a good full bladder ultrasound per abdomen. I don't think a 3D would be needed in such a case. Instead, I would do I would follow that IDEA protocol in which we do the sliding sign to see the pelvic adhesions. If I do find that there are pelvic adhesions and I do see a nodularity, then yes, MRI would be indicated. Otherwise, a simple whole abdomen, of course, like we have indicated, the whole abdomen must be done, because we need to see that what exactly is associated with this. So that, and there is no need of MRI in this particular case unless we see that the sliding sign is showing us that there is occlusion of pouch of Douglas or there are peritoneal adhesions.
Suppose if you have a doubt whether it is dermoid, or sometimes appearance of dermoid is also like that of adenometrioma, still you will like to omit this investigation, or you will like to be...
If I see any solid component, if I see any echogenic component which is not indicating of typical or atypical endometrioma, then yes, I would like to go for an MRI, but not as my first line in this particular
very
case.
rightly pointed out. Thank you, Glossy. So, Dr. Mamta, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good afternoon, Mamta. I think I am meeting you for the first time.
Yes,
Was
yes,
the
ma'am.
decision to do surgery was correct, Mamta? 2 years back, the surgery was done to her for her, and that time she must be 16 years old.
I know this is an academic discussion. Still, I would like to refrain from talking about any decision taken by any doctor. Doctor always act in the best interest of the patient. And knowledge of adolescent endometriosis is not that wide, or people are not aware about it. But recent studies have shown that the chances of recurrence is very high, which has happened in this case if you do surgery at an early age. So I would say that she should have been managed medically rather than going ahead with the surgery.
Okay. As per various studies and in the literature, one should try to avoid surgery in the young girls as far as possible, and do not worry about the size of the cyst. If symptoms are relieved by medical management, because medical management definitely can decrease the size, but you have to counsel the patient that if you think that it will completely subside, it may not be so. So, and you have to tell the disadvantages of, as Dr. Nina has already pointed out, what are the disadvantages of doing surgery in such a young patient. And you should also explain what are the chances of recurrence, and which various studies have given varying from 7 to 21% in 2 years and 40 to 50% in 5 years. If you do first surgery and second surgery, recurrence rate is around 13.7%, 2 years, of course, 37. So various studies have given different recurrence rated. One should that keep in mind. So what are the risk factors for recurrence, Dr. Mamta?
Of all the variables, which include the stage of disease, the size of the cyst, they have not been shown to be cause of the recurrence. Only young age at the surgery so far has been proven to be the main cause for the recurrence.
Yeah, and a lot of, carry on, Dr. Mamta.
Yeah, that is what. And recently, however, the people are saying that if it is more than 9 centimeter, this is the recent studies of 21. Earlier, they said that only age is the important factor, nothing else. Age at surgery.
Yeah, definitely. The study published has shown a number of factors which may be responsible for recurrence, but one is never sure why recurrence is occurring, because the exact factor, whichever theory was responsible for that, that is still existing, even if you do surgery or you. So that will come in the picture once you stop medical management or once you the surgery or some time has lapsed. So there's some pathophysiology given behind that. Either it is an existing one or new one or which has been reactivated. So I'm not going into the theoretical aspect of that. So as far as why the surgery was concerned, there is no consensus as to whether the surgery should be avoided as much as possible to prevent multiple surgeries in the long term, or surgery should be considered at an early age before more severe lesion appear. So nowadays, most of the guidelines say that you should manage maximally with medical management rather than jumping onto the surgery at the first go. So Dr. Mamta, which will be the management strategy this time? What are the options for her now?
So now we have a very good medicine, Dynogest. In this case, I would go for that, because the long-term studies have shown that Dynogest given decreases the cyst size by 66% in 6 months and by 75% in 1 year. And the studies are also there that Dynogest can be given till 5 years of age. Although there is a small risk of loss of bone mineral density, but this girl is 18-year-old. And so I think Dynogest would be the best option for her.
Yeah, very right. You have very right pointed out. A lot of studies are there on the endometrioma as far as the Dynogest is concerned. They have compared between the combined oral contraceptive pills and Dynogest alone. So this particular study has basically seen the size on the symptomatology, and this has been published recently only in 2020, Gynecology Endocrinology Journal, and the size of endometrium was significantly reduced after using 2 milligram Dynogest. But another study shows that if you use more than 52 weeks or so, they do have effect on spinal BMD, which is partially reversible once you stop the drug. Another thing is, of course, the cost of the drug, which if the patient can afford, then
also if you stop Dynogest, there is a high chance of recurrence as well.
Yeah, definitely. And Dynogest, as you know, it is anti-proliferative, anti-angiogenic. So this is one of the drug of choice for especially recurrent endometriomas.
And that is what to be different from other progesterone, because it has anti-angiogenic and anti-proliferative effect.
Yeah, that is what is, when it is, they have compared with GnRH analog, also it is found to be equally effective in reducing the pain as well as the size. So this patient, we also put her on Dynogest continuously. And after 3 months, when she came back to us, the size of the cyst reduced from 6 centimeter to 4.5 centimeter. So at present, the patient is still on Dynogest, and she is on follow-up, and she is symptom-free as of now. Now I'll hand over to Dr. Nina. Thank you very much for all the panelists for very enlightening us on the various aspects of endometriosis.
Thank you.
Very nicely answered.
You can keep on continuing your sharing your screen and just project the case.
And please, Nina, I hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Reena. So now that we have all the knowledge, what all is our in basket, what all can be used, there is this very practical case I'm just going to receive. In fact, all panelists feel free to come up with their suggestions. There is this 18-year-old presented in OPD along with a mother with vague pain abdomen for last 6 months. She had gone to her local doctor initially, where she was given antibiotic courses. She had had several courses of doxycycline and Ciprobid and a lot of other antibiotics. She was given antihelminthics as well. She was prescribed painkillers SOS. She had had everything from paracetamol to tramadol. Her ultrasound report of whole abdomen was unable to pick up any abnormality. Her basic blood and urine reports were okay as well. And while examining her alone, her sexual history was asked, and then she revealed that dyspareunia was a problem. And then whenever she was with her boyfriend, she had deep pain on deep penetration. So what is your take on it?
I think first of all, we have to understand it's a chronic pelvic pain. She's giving a history of 6 months. So
yes. So basically, just to make things easier, because time is also running out, she was diagnosed as deep infiltrating endometriosis. After her all investigations were done, clinical examination was done, and her MRI was also done after doing ultrasound. So how would you like to manage this 18-year-old girl who has deep infiltrating endometriosis, although rare, but still it is present in clinical situation? So what all would you like to do for her so that she feels relieved? Open to all panelists, whosoever wants to answer.
So the diagnosis, I'll just cite out 2 cases. I had similar 2 cases, and I managed them with Dynogest, and both of them responded. Both of them had a diagnostic ultrasound done, and as Glossy pointed out, a good 3D ultrasound with it pointed out a good, a DIE, and they responded very well to Dynogest. But then I was like, okay, after a few years of Dynogest, because she had taken Dynogest for 4 years, and then I was like, okay, what to give her? And then I had put her, now she's on LNG IUD, because now she's sexually active, so she's on LNG IUD. So I would have
but this one is sexually active. She's 18, she's already sexually active.
She has, I would suggest, both the options, the Dynogest and the LNG IUD, after counseling her.
Dr. Nina? You are mute. Nina, you are mute.
Yeah, so coming to, I agree with Dr. Sonia that we can try the medical management in these patients, as we have already discussed before, and LNGP, the levonorgestrel IUCD should be a good option in these patients. If they are not responsive, then there is a big question as to how to proceed, because it's a multidisciplinary approach in these patients, whether they are rectovaginal nodules, how the surgeries are to be planned. If the laparoscopy is to be done, then it is first laparoscopy which should give her the final treatment. So the laparoscopic operative is a big dilemma in these adolescents. So I feel, and I agree with Dr. Sonia, to go on with the medical management. If the patient is not responsive to this medical management, then go in for laparoscopy.
Yes,
and then plan accordingly.
She's 18 years old now. We put in LNG Mirena for her, but we should at the same time counsel her that she should be using dual contraception. She should be using barrier contraceptive as well. Because today we are in endometriosis CME, and yesterday we were in contraceptive one. So we have to utilize both our knowledge when we're dealing with these young girls. It is not, we should be concentrating only on Mirena and not on condoms.
And then when we are looking into long-term, like in these young individuals, we are looking into Dynogest as a long-term treatment. So after 1 year, we normally find that the bone mineral density of these girls goes low. Though it is reversible after stopping it, but we are giving it for 4-5 years, and add back therapy with norethindrone acetate 5 milligram and ethinyl estradiol 0.6 to 5 milligram should be added to prevent these bone mineral density issues.
That would be in a situation if she was needed to go on to GnRH.
Yeah.
But at above 18, it can be considered as well if at point of time the problem is so much which is not being solved with other things. For short period of time, we can definitely use this. So anybody who's...
Nina, can I say a word?
Yeah, definitely.
Like I use LNG IUS for adolescents, sexually active, and other age group also who already married and have children for deep infiltrating endometriosis. And somehow my experience is that after 2 years, the effect starts waning. So I read about it, and the problem with LNG IUS is that initially for 1 or 2 years, the hormone release is higher compared to 3rd, 4th year. So what I have done for 2 patients, that after 2 years, I took out the LNG, put another one, and then she was all right, maybe they need higher dose, that's my personal experience, so just wanted to share.
Yes, yes, definitely.
That's
So
another.
basically, we have to understand that we have to keep on changing and rotating whatever is in our basket. We have to use as and when it's not fixed for one each patient. And I would like our experts now to comment. Make the Dr. Angela, Dr. Malvika.
My recommendation remains whatever you have said. Progestin should be used as a first line of treatment because it prevents the progression of the disease also. I have, and second thing I will like to say, we have to, for the general public, whenever there is a cyst, we always write CA 125. And then once it's high, the patient goes from one oncosurgeon to another oncosurgeon. They do a laparotomy, do oophorectomy, and this is an endometriotic cyst. I think it's very important. It's a time has come now. We have treated many patients who are like this. Then they have infertility and stage 4 endometriosis. So my request is that we should do CA 125 with a pinch of salt and try to treat adolescents endometriosis with conservative, as our learned, esteemed panelists and moderators have said. Another thing, we can give oral contraceptive pills to the girls along with the barrier to prevent them from STDs, and the one who are sexually active. So once you sit, you talk to them, they also understand. But with doing CA 125 and doing surgeries for all young girls, it should not be done. And now the days have gone. We have managed many patients on Dynagest, and I feel it's a wonder drug. That's my personal this thing. And another thing is, I think if you do a surgery, then you must counsel a patient that endometriosis is a long-term chronic disease. It will come back. Okay, it's not that you are going to cure now, it will not be there. Second, talk about their AMH levels and ovarian reserves also. Another point which I will like to add and then give to Dr. Malvika is, if you are doing any other pelvic surgery or you have put a scope inside, like a patient who had a torsion turned out to be dermoid, they have removed the dermoid, but there was an associated endometriosis. She was not done anything for the endometriosis. Please always stage the disease, write properly in your notes, counsel your patient that there is an endometriosis and make a plan for her. It's our responsibility, our duty to diagnose, make a plan, whether she takes or not, it's her choice. This is what I will like to say. Now I will like to hand over to Dr. Malvika.
Thank you very much. And I congratulate Angela, the team, to have organized this beautiful webinar, and the moderators and the panelists who've done a wonderful job. You've covered a very enigmatic topic in a very beautiful way, bringing forth the fact that it is enigmatic and conservation is what is needed for such patients. Also, whether it is the disease, whether it's the fertility will eventually may get affected. I think there was a time when I think Dr. Reena pointed out at there being a good counseling, because that is something when a person, when a little child comes to you and a young teenager she is losing on the school days, she is actually going crazy they have so much of stress just because they cannot share the problems. They cannot share all the problems, whether in the family or with the friends. It's very important for the doctor to counsel the patient as to where she stands. The index of suspicion has to be high, because if she's coming with this kind of pain wherein you're thinking that it could be endometriosis, you will definitely, the first thing that you're going to do is probably start NSAIDs, no doubt, and very soon jump on to COCs if the age permits. Very nicely, it was pointed out about the bone mineral density, about the growth of the little child who is now 17, 18. And once she's attained, you have to start with COCs. Of course, norethistedone, the derivatives, they are wonder drugs. They have got some estrogenic activity, Rita Mai very nicely pointed out, along with the progestational effect. So they are definitely absolutely wonderful. And personally, one has used it right from day 5 for 21 days with excellent results. Dynagest is the new chip in the block. I think it's favorite for all of us. But one extremely important thing is that these girls who are coming to us, no doubt they are adolescent endometriosis. They may be just stage 1 and 2. They may not be having endometriomas. They may not be being picked up by the ultrasound, but the follow-up is very important. The secondary dysmenorrhea has been ruled out. They have to come regularly to you, and you must empathize with them and talk to them for an extra 5 minutes, telling them what they are in for. One thing very important I would like to say, that in case she was to eventually come on with endometriomas in the subsequent years, or she may have the next, you have to make sure that you do talk about early marriage, about early conception, about the ovarian reserve, etc., etc., and defer laparoscopy, very nicely pointed out right at the beginning by Dr. Sharda Madam, and so forth. It has been, so you have to tell exactly the patient where she is, and don't let her get scared, because they're the ones who get stressed out. So tell them where they are. Plan the first laparoscopy as the best laparoscopy, because in case they do require laparoscopy for endometriomas or eventually years, then it should be the best. A good cystectomy if need be, good clearance, getting the uterotube-ovarian axis correctly placed, etc., will solve the problem, along with what was brought out, that Mullerian problems, in case it is there. That, of course, is an acute emergency. You may need to do it at a much younger age. But otherwise, if possible, try and defer your first laparoscopy as much as possible and have the patient in follow-up. That has to be the best. AMH to be done pre-operatively and post-operatively. And I congratulate everybody for a wonderful session. Thank you so much. We have all got our take-home messages, beautiful ones.
Thank you, Dr. Malvika.
Can I make a comment before we go to the quiz? Just 1 minute. I know we are running.
Definitely, Dr. Meenakshi and Dr. Anita, we are waiting for your comments.
Yeah, so I think most importantly that, I think everyone said everything, but 3 small things just as a recap. The first, what we've learned with adolescent endometriosis is that the eye can see only what the mind knows. And now that we all know that we've learned about our adolescent endometriosis, we must keep a high index of suspicion and see it and recognize it when we see it. The second thing is that we have to understand that it is a disease which starts in adolescence, but it is going to continue till menopause. So that woman is going to be with us for a long, long term. And it is going to have its ups and downs like any other relationship. And she needs to be managed for that whole duration. And that's why, as a good obstetrician and gynecologist, we hope that that patient stays with us throughout that long tenure. And that is why it's very important to be having an open conversation with her, discussing her options every time and giving her time. Just because she's not an antenatal patient or she's not an operative patient doesn't mean that we don't give her time and the patience and the respect that she deserves. And thirdly, please remember that mental health is a very, very important thing in these patients. She's troubled with pain. She is troubled with anxiety about the disease, her future fertility. And as gynecologists, we are all aware that everyone is on the internet and Google these days. And we use words casually, like infertility and other problems. They can have a very long-standing effect on a 16 or an 18-year-old girl, and obviously her parents. So, that discussion and being open, we have to inform them, but still not put them in the fear of the disease, and explain to them that management and correct management at the right time is definitely going to make her life comfortable. We all see women who've reached menopause with endometriosis, and we have all been managing them for the last 25, 30 years. So that reassurance, along with explaining to them the risks, is very, very important. That's all I had to add.
Yes, Meenakshi, you have to empower the young girl, actually. She should be proud of being a girl, and she's the one who's eventually going to be, whichsoever way, lead a beautiful life. So we really have to empower her with all the knowledge. Thank you.
Actually, ma'am, very rightly said. Counseling is very, very important, specifically in adolescent endometriosis. Maybe we have to sit with the adolescent and then her parents separately, and then both of them together. We have to discuss long-term issues, fertility issues,
Absolutely.
very rightly put by Meenakshi. And we have to be honest. We have to tell them that it is a progressive disease. It will come up again and again. And we can defer the surgery as far as possible and keep her on chronic, it is a chronic manageable disease. That is the way I put up it to my patients. So everything has been very well covered, or how to diagnose, how to suspect, what are the red flag signs, in which patients we should suspect and everything has been very well highlighted by these varied presentations that were discussed. We have to be, we have to be cautious about atypical presentations also. Like patients may present with cyclical pneumothorax or hemothorax. So there are presentations, there are various case reports in which there have been atypical presentations, as umbilical endometriosis was discussed in one of the patients. So we should keep our eyes open for these atypical presentations also. That is all I have to add to it. And Dynogest, I feel, is a very good drug if used judiciously, because it has got anti-proliferative, anti-inflammatory, anti-angiogenic property. It is immunomodulator also. And yesterday or 2 days back, I was listening to the etiopathogenesis, because microRNA level, RNA levels are now being diagnosed, which are said to be important. And recent concept of this disease being, progesterone, means it is resistant to progesterone treatment, is also being discussed in recent past. So all this is relevant, and it is an evolving science, and we must keep abreast with the knowledge for proper management of our patients. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Please, all you people out there, don't leave.
Nina, Dr. Jain wants to say something.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. Sorry, I was.
Ma'am, you're not audible. Yeah. Now it's better. Just say something, ma'am.
Dynogest is a wonderful drug, and people have had surgery. I always tell them, even if somebody else has done a surgery, I always tell them that in case if you don't want a recurrence, you have to take a Dynogest. And I think those people have been doing this particular job. The recurrence to my mind is very, very little, and this has only happened when they have stopped the drug. But now they have been using it for 7-8 years, and things are doing very well. So this part of recurrence must be told to them, that in case if you do not take this particular wonderful drug, and if you just play with things are going to be a problem. It's a news to me that as early as 18 years you are using LNG for this particular use, and I do not know. I think Dr. Indu shared it, that after 2 years it is not effective, and one can change it and use. I have no experience on this, but I feel in case if you make a mess of repeated surgeries, these people have IVF, and they too also failed. They are in a wreck, and finally at the age of 30, 35, they have hysterectomy by people, which is very, very sad. So I think the time has come that we must give them a due time to these people, that they do not land up with problems like this. Those days are gone. That every month the parents used to be sitting in our clinic. Those days are gone, and I think this is all because of the Dynogest.
I also
agree.
We see patients crying, and now they are much better. But the problem is, this has to be taught to everyone. One of my patients went for an examination to an onco-surgeon. He said, "Why are you taking this hormone? You will get a breast cancer." I said, "Now you stop it. Don't talk about it. You won't just get a breast cancer."
Secondly is that, for follow-up, once they are on a Dynogest, they forget Dr. Sharda, then they forget Angela. They themselves have learned it. They become so symptom-free.
Yeah.
And now, because they're educated,
Madam, I had a case.
Educated, they know about the drug.
No, madam, I had a case who was being treated and who was self-medicating also, taking Dynogest. She was a case of stage 4 endometriosis with large endometriomas, and eventually she landed up having, one could see a papilla coming on. We must tell them not to self-medicate. They must come for regular follow-up.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Madam, you may say anything, but they forget about it because they're symptom-free.
Nina, I
Absolutely
think
true.
cost is also a factor in our country.
I think we can start with the quiz, otherwise the time of the
Madam,
thing will go.
but for
Okay.
pain, the cost is not much. The cost is not much. On every episode of pain, you know, the parents used to spend much more than, you know, the cost of monthly drug.
Definitely, well said. Yeah. So, ma'am, can we start with the quiz?
Yes, Nina.
Yeah. So this